The smell of good bread baking, like the sound of lightly flowing water, is indescribable in its invocation of innocence and delight. M.F.K. Fisher. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I'm your host. I'd like to welcome everyone. I hope you are all doing well, and if you're a newcomer, thank you for joining me. I hope you will enjoy and peruse our backlog of episodes, and if you're a returning listener, thank you guys, as always, for your continued support. I want to go ahead and apologize to you guys again for last week's non-episode. I felt awful Sunday night, and I really didn't feel better until Wednesday, even going to work and all that kind of stuff. So, but I am back. I'm feeling much better, despite the time change here in the U.S. and losing an hour of sleep. I'm doing well, and I'm ready to get back into it. Now, last couple of weeks, we've been in North America. We've been discussing all kinds of things from etymology to mythology / religion, as well as, some devastating climatic events or geographic or geological events, I guess, for lack of a better term. But this week, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on kind of chronology and actual material culture, though, as we'll see here shortly, that's not the easiest thing to talk about, but we'll get into that. First thing I do want to get into, though, is just to remind everyone that, for the most part, during this season, North America and, South America as well, the Americas essentially, most people are still primarily hunter-gatherers, and will be, until parts of next season, even as crop domestication is taking place in both North and South America. Towards kind of the end part of this season is probably when they really get fully domesticated crops. So they're still in that process of transitioning from wild gathering, hunting, to hunting, gathering, with a little bit of horticulture on crops, and then that transitional phase to full-scale sedentary agriculture. So it is kind of hard to nail down kind of large-scale material cultures the way we've done in Asia and in Europe. That's not to say that people haven't tried for North America. It's just during this time frame, it's a very rough thing to do. Now, we do get those later, but for the most part, you see things referred to as either horizons or traditions. The naming for this kind of stuff is pretty bad, in my opinion. And I'll try to kind of explain what's being referred to when we talk about these various traditions. But just keep in mind that the dates on these are usually very, very broad. They take very, very long periods of time, and they're not universal. They don't always exist in the same place for the same amount of time. Various groups fall into and out of these horizons, and some groups leave forever, some groups stay in there, or they develop additional traditions to add to these horizons. And we'll get into that as it happens. And I'm going to try and keep things on a geographical basis, talk about one tradition for a specific, not necessarily one tradition for a specific region, but we'll talk about a specific region and then any kinds of traditions associated with said region. Now, that does not mean that they're the oldest tradition in the Americas, but that's just kind of where we're going. We're kind of going down the west coast, and then we'll kind of move to the east a little, back to the center of North America, and then we'll head further south. Now, again, that's not saying that there's no one living in the eastern United States. There certainly are, but it's a very small number, at least from what we've found so far. And still a very very much traditional mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyle in those regions for a little bit longer, at least until agriculture spreads back up from what is now Mexico and Peru, I believe, is where agriculture emerges in South America. But I do recommend you guys going back and listening to the crop domestication episodes for the North America, or well, the Americas foods. It's a very useful episode when you're kind of visualizing some of this stuff. Also, a lot of these traditions have multiple names depending on where they're being discussed. So I may switch between these names, but there's a lot of it's just bad trying to research some of this stuff because they can't agree on what something should be called, and it's a very big pain to kind of organize and talk about. So I'm going to do my best to kind of make it easier for you guys than it was for me. Now, we are firmly in what is referred to as the Archaic period, at least that's what it's referred to in North America. Now, the Archaic period is broken down further into the early, middle, and late. The early Archaic period is basically ending right as this season starts. So 6000 BC, BCE, whichever you prefer. Apologies for the cut there. There was an ambulance in the background, and I just wanted to stop it while I could, but I also wanted to finish that thought. So the prior stage to this was just the lithic stage, also sometimes referred to as the Paleo-Indian stage, though that is a little bit of an older term. And that included things like the Folsom tradition, the Dalton, other things like that. But the early Archaic, as I said, is ending nominally as the season starts. So there are traditions that are continuing even past this point that do emerge in that early Archaic period. And this includes things like the peoples we talked about the last couple of weeks, the ancestors of the Proto-Aleutians or Alouettes, the tribes in Canada, the Pacific Northwest, basically any of the very heavily maritime-focused Native American groups in kind of the northwest of what is now the U.S. and Canada, the West Coast, those kind of regions where they are developing more and more advanced fishing techniques. They're taking advantage of salmon runs. They're improving their, I wouldn't say ship, but boat building, canoeing, things like that. Anything to help them take advantage of the vast amount of maritime resources that exist in the area. There are also peoples who are again, moving into the Arctic, following things like caribou herds and things like that. These are all traditions that do start in the early Archaic period and continue on even into the next period and even the period after that, while they are adding more and more tools and things like that to these traditions and evolving them, or, as they get to a new region, developing new lifestyles as they go forward. Apologies for the cut again. I think there is some type of accident or something on the interstate because another ambulance just drove by. So apologies for that. So these Archaic periods for the Arctic is sometimes referred to as the Paleo-Arctic tradition. And then you also have the Maritime Archaic, which is the Pacific Northwest, Western Canada, the islands right off the coast of Alaska, including the Aleutians. Those are all kind of broadly within the Maritime Archaic, and then again, there is some overlap between the Maritime Archaic and the Paleo-Arctic traditions. But again, we don't see too much that is radically different from the Paleo Indian stage or the Lithic stage. They are developing more specialized tools, things like that. And as the weather is getting warmer and more comfortable, they are beginning to, change how they're changing their lifestyles to an extent. It's not as cold, so they're able to do a little bit more, be a little bit more active for periods of time, at least outside of the Arctic Circle. But that's kind of what you see, which again doesn't really show up great in the archaeological record, but it is visible, even if it doesn't lend itself to being able to see a lot in terms of progression, I guess. Like it's not quite as visible the way pottery is. You can easily see how pottery evolves over time, but these other traditions, they're much more esoteric or ethereal, and you kind of have to make assumptions, unfortunately, in some situations like that. Now, moving south from those cultural horizons, you enter, of course, into California, Southern California, and you begin to see what is referred to sometimes as the Millingstone Horizon or the Encinitas Tradition. Encinitas is the name used in in the United States, primarily California, and that comes from this. It's a town called Encinitas, so that's where the name comes from. Though it is much wider spread than just Southern California, they have found a fairly decent sized concentration of sites in that area, but it's much wider spread than that. Though, as we'll discuss, this may have come up from what is now Central America, or from Mexico, and then from neighboring places in the American Southwest, what is now like Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. But there is debate about that. Some people think it may have been, just kind of both groups kind of starting around the same time. Other people think it was more of a diffusion. It's hard to say for sure. They start fairly close to each, in terms of timing, right around 5,500, 5,000 BC. So, it's very possible it could have spread, via word of mouth, but it is also possible that, this is just it is a fairly simple form of technology, so it is not necessarily that hard to figure out. Though one of the things that gives me pause on that and makes me think, well, maybe it was a case of diffusion, is that the grindstones, or the millingstones, or to use the word that's usually brought up in North American archaeology, the metate, and the mano, which is the stone you hold in your hand and you move along the grindstone, or the metate, is you're typically grinding flour, or in this case corn, if you're speaking in North American terms, or maize. You're grinding that to make flour for various types of bread, or other dough. Now, there is no proto-agriculture, at least from what we've been able to tell, in Southern California at the time period that the Millingstone Horizon reaches Southern California. Whereas when it's emerging in, what is now Mexico, they're at the very least at that horticulture stage, and there is wild maize, the crop that eventually becomes the domesticated strain of maize, exists in that part of Mexico. Now, they could have been experimenting with wild varieties, and that's not the only thing you grind on a grindstone, or kern is another term for it. You do that with nuts, berries. You can do it too. You also could be grinding up medicinal herbs. The metate is used to grind many things, but that is one theory that, to me, does see that it could be a case of diffusion, and it would have arrived ahead of actual domesticated crops. But that's all just speculation. Now, as I said, this is a very widespread horizon, if you will, and it lasts for a very long time, obviously well into the historical period. But on the archaeological scale, the Millingstone Horizon or the Encinitas Tradition, depending on what you want to call it, they list it as lasting until about 1500 BC. Now, on individual levels, there are still cases where these are, again, used into the historical period. We're talking, into by the time the Europeans get here, they're still being used. So why they choose to terminate it at that point, like in terms of the archaeological record, I don't know. Maybe it's at that point that the technology has basically spread to everyone, even remotely involved with any type of agricultural production, and it's just ubiquitous. And I'm assuming that's why they do what they did. But I can't get a firm answer. And try Googling the Encinitas Tradition or anything else. It's just going to give you tourism ads for Encinitas, California, which does look pretty nice. I will not lie. It's right near San Diego. But it's very hard to get a firm answer on that. So honestly, I don't know. If anyone has any information on that, I would love to know it. So please, if you are aware, please let me know. But yeah, in what is now the U.S., it lasts from about 5,500 to about 1,500 BCE. Though in Mexico, it's again considered lasting from about 6,500 to about 1,500. So a little bit longer in what is now Mexico than California. Now, in terms of the people of the Encinitas Tradition, at least the ones in California, because again, it's a very widespread horizon. There are those that believe, and I'm one of them, based on just what I've read in the literature and based on the research people have done. It does appear that the initial people practicing this in California do still live in the area historically, or into the modern day. And these are known as the Chumash people. Now, are they there the entire period at this point? Well, they are mobile hunter-gatherers, so they may move out of the region, but they do establish permanent settlements there, at the very least by 4,500, 4,000, somewhere in that range. But it's very possible that they were living there much earlier. But again, mobile hunter-gatherers, they're moving in and out, but this is one of their, traditional ranges before they began to set up permanent settlements. Now, they're probably not the only Native American groups living in the area. There are others that were nearby. There is evidence that some of the people who eventually speak the Chumash language spoke maybe another language before they adopted Chumash. All of this is very heavily debated. But there are a lot of modern place names in the area that do have Chumash origins. Either they are direct Chumash words or they are probably Spanish corruptions of Chumash names. Malibu is one. Ojai, Pismo Beach, Pismo. Simi Valley is also considered to have come from the Chumash language, and there are many others. Their population today is a little hard to narrow down. I've seen different numbers depending on the source, but there's anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 Chumash individuals living in California today. Now, their language is technically extinct. The last native speaker died in 1965. However, several of the Chumash languages were written down, and in some cases, parts of them were recorded. So there are currently some revitalization efforts. at least for some of the Chumash languages. I think there are 4 that they have been able to preserve at least pretty well. Then there are a couple that are gone. Now, due to the nature of the area, their primary source of food was not necessarily wild grains. And even once agriculture arrives, they still have a very healthy maritime tradition as well. Chumash means bead maker, or possibly also seashell people. And they were very heavily involved in harvesting the shells of the marine snails in the area, so they would use those for trade. And they also have some incredible rock art. And I'll include some images of that, though most of the examples we have come from a much later period in Chumash history. But, a lot of those cave paintings, they do degrade over time, so there's probably, Chumash art layered over older Millingstone or Encinitas Tradition art. But I'll include some pictures of that on the YouTube episode. And in addition to their cave paintings, they also practiced a form, a great word, arborglyphs. They would carve images into nearby trees, and as they grew up, these or as the trees grew larger, the designs would, of course, become more pronounced. Also, these are sometimes referred to as dendroglyphs, or just other. There's a lot of different names for this, but arborglyphs is the easiest one for me to pronounce, so that's the one I'm using. Though, again, I do need to stress that the Chumash may not have considered themselves the Chumash at this early stage. They may have not had a larger identity. Eventually, there's going to be a couple of hundred villages in the area, or right around 200. But prior to that, again, there's probably not much larger identity associated with these villages. There's probably just a few, a few like nuclear families that are loosely related to each other, at least at this early stage. Eventually, though, they'll develop a larger group identity, which is something you see, of course, in a lot of different areas, including, Asia and Europe and places like that. But at the very least, some of the Chumash ancestors were in the area. And there's, we'll get into it later, but there's also the theory that perhaps some Polynesian groups actually arrived to the area at a much later date, and at the very least traded with the Chumash, though, again, that's all stuff we'll discuss later. Now, a neighbor in this region to the Encinitas Tradition is known as the San Dieguito complex. And when I say neighbor, I mean they are almost entirely in the same general area, around the same time, too, at least when they emerged. So, initially, somewhere in what is now Mexico, the American Southwest, and the southern part of California, near where San Diego is. Now, this is more specifically a tool-making tradition. These are characterized by very complex places where a lot of different types of tools were made. They had a lot of scrapers, large flake biface stones. They had a lot of different types of projectile points, and they also showed no signs of manos or metates. Now, that does not mean that the people living here did not possess that technology. It's very possible that this is just specific areas where they would come for stone that's useful for making tools, and they may have traded these with other people for things made, or foodstuffs made by the people with the manos and metates. There's some people who think that this may have been a group that was still very much focused on hunting, as opposed to this kind of proto-horticulture, agriculture. But then there are also people who think that they were probably just foragers who, who did like to hunt and still continued, kind of the big game traditions from earlier periods. Though I will say the San Dieguito kind of cultural tradition or horizon, whatever you want to call it, does extend a little bit further north than the Encinitas tradition much earlier. They get up to places like Colorado and that general area, whereas the Encinitas or the Millingstone tradition, they don't really get there until a much later period. And again, this kind of plays into that ebb and flow, and different groups getting to different areas at different times, possibly leaving, possibly developing new technologies. But that's all part of the ebb and flow, I guess, of the life of Native Americans in North America during this period. And the San Dieguito could last till about 200 CE. So they're still making these larger tools in some cases, into the I guess what you consider the classical age. Though in North America, that period is referred to as it has a number of names, including classical, in some cases post-classical, or the formative period. Though again, that term varies from region to region and depending on the person writing about the time. But just keep that in mind. And with the introduction of the San Dieguito, also this is also sometimes referred as the Pinto Tradition. Again, regional name variants. I think the Pinto is the more, I think that's more of like the name that you'll see in some Mexican sources. Though, again, that does vary. Some in the U.S. use it too. It really just depends. Also, there is also sometimes a change depending on what time period this takes place in. So as it goes on, it may, the newer sites may sometimes be referred to as Pinto as opposed to the San Dieguito, just because it's considered like a slow advancement of the tradition or the horizon. Though with that, we are reaching the Southwest, and there's a lot of and that's in terms of the American Southwest, but it's also a lot of these overlap with parts of Mexico. And that is something we'll deal with next week. We'll talk about, there's about 3 or 4 more traditions or horizons in that general vicinity. And again, there's a lot of back and forth on these. Some groups stay in certain areas longer, or there's back and forth with trade or travel. Again, because most people are still mobile hunter-gatherers in this region. And of course, with the climate in the area, staying at one place too long isn't necessarily possible at this early stage. Though, eventually, they do figure it out, and there are more permanent settlements being established as time goes on. But that's what we'll pick up next week. And that'll probably be your longer episode. I want to get this one recorded and in the can before it gets too late, because I still have to adjust my sleep schedule for work. But there should be a nice long episode for you guys next week. Though this one's only about 30 minutes, so I think you guys will enjoy. But I hope you enjoyed at the very least. But if you guys have any questions, comments, constructive criticism, or if you know the answer to, the timing of the Millingstone tradition, I'd be happy to hear that. You can reach me at waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can comment on the YouTube videos. You can also send me a direct message on X/Twitter, and I'll be glad to read and respond to any feedback at any of those locations. You can also comment on Spotify, but Spotify doesn't always tell me I have comments, so I do apologize, because I noticed a couple of people have left some comments there that Spotify just didn't tell me about. I just happened to log in to Spotify's creator portal just to check some stuff out, and I saw I had I had comments on episodes. So if you've been leaving comments there, I appreciate it. But yeah, I hope you all have a good rest of your day and week from whenever you're listening to this. And we will return next week to finish up the archaic traditions or horizons of what is now the American Southwest and the nation of Mexico. Anyway, I hope you all have a good night. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.